I would like to thank all from the Besides the Screen network and all the organization of the event. I was very happy to be selected, and I think it's a super special opportunity. And what I will present today is research that will result in a paper very briefly. I'm in the process of finishing writing it, and it is called the Expanded Audiovisual Field, a critical repertoire. And the idea is to explore the transversalities between experimental cinema, video art, and live audiovisual performance. And I'm aiming at two main things. The first one is to establish a set of works that could be useful to understand how contemporary experimental audiovisual languages evolve. So what are their roots? Where did they come from? What are the experiments that are relevant to understand what has been doing, what people are doing nowadays in terms of experimental audiovisual languages, and especially there's an emphasis on live performances, but not restricted to that. And part of that is related to the necessity of teaching these experiences in the university. So since I'm working both with design and with experimental audiovisual languages, it's always clear how with design there is already a lot of established materials and things that you can rely on when you are introducing students, and especially students that have never heard any prior information about those languages about it. And then with experimental audiovisual languages, it's not that much of a given. So part of this effort actually is a consequence of, let's say, 10 years of trying to prepare materials to deliver those courses at the university. And eventually that became a larger effort to organize that and somehow try to shape an overview of what a student should somehow have contact with to understand that context and that background. And the second thing is related to doing the critical analysis of such works. Because if you overview the bibliography related to this kind of topics, it's much more common to find panoramical and historical texts that develop overviews about, let's say, experimental cinema or video art or whatever, rather than articles or even books that develop more detailed criticism of works. So another aspect of my research is trying to somehow address this lack of criticism and then propose more direct readings of work and more detailed readings of some significant pieces in order to establish well, I mean, to provide this sort of bibliography also for students. And there are two main authors that are inspirations, let's say, to this effort. And the first one is Arlindo Machado, who I want to dedicate this presentation to, by the way, because I think some of the people here probably know that, and if not, it's sad information to share, but he just passed away 4 or 5 days ago. And he's written this book called Television Taken Seriously, in which he argues for the establishment of this critical repertoire of 50 TV programs that every student of audiovisual languages should have contact with. And he argues in the direction that writings about TV in general tend to adopt, at least in Brazil, that's how it was in the time when he wrote this, which is about 20 years ago, like around 2000. Writings about television tend to be very severe readings of programs that are not so well done. So soap operas and talk shows and a lot of things that are not good examples of sophisticated exploration of audiovisual languages, and people that study television just address it mainly to let's say highlight the problematic aspects or discuss sociological receptions of these kind of efforts. And he proposes, or he draws this analogy with literature. He argues that in literature schools, the people tend to study the most important, the most sophisticated, and most well-realized books in the history of literature. So he decides to create this list of 50 TV programs that he considered to be the equivalent of these well-established literary books. And this kind of proposal has debatable ideas. I'm aware of that. There are problems with trying to establish some sort of canon, and I do not aim to make a list that is for all and to be taken as like the necessary examples of good audiovisual experimental languages of anything of that sort. It's much more modest in its aims. It's more this idea of trying to organize things that are somehow useful for students and research to start from, and then from there draw their own visions on these sort of experiences. And the second author that is important to this research is Philippe Dubois. He's done this article on this book that was launched, if I'm not wrong, only in Brazil, called Cinema Video Godard. And it's a compilation of articles that were in France published in several magazines, and then the editor of the book organized it as a single volume in Brazil. And in one of the texts, Dubois discusses how the criticism of video art lacks a vocabulary, and how sometimes it imports words from the tradition of film analysis is inappropriate to some extent, because when you're talking about video, there are a lot of operations in terms of montage that are completely new and essentially different from how they were done in cinema. And just to sum up it very briefly, it's mostly related with the fact that cinema is mainly edited through sequential cuttings. Of course, there are fusions and other forms of superimposing images, but that's not that simple to do in analogic film, and so it's not that common in more established cinematic languages. And then video is much more about overlaying, so mixing and embedding images one within the other, and etc. So this is something I'm trying to do in this research also. And the idea is to encounter proper words to discuss audiovisual languages. What are the vocabularies that are appropriate to make the analysis of such examples? And I propose a different approach than the one that was discussed by Dubois in his article, because he was working mainly in terms of an opposition between video and cinema. And I'm much more interested in the layers and the cumulative inheritance that those languages somehow develop along time. So I think film analysis is important to discuss audio-video performance to some extent, and the idea of frame and sequencing and others that are used to discuss cinema can, of course, be transported, but they're not enough. So my approach is much more about mixing all existent vocabularies and adding new concepts. And what I'm going to do, I don't know how much more time I have actually. But what I'm going to do is share my screen right now and quickly go through the examples, the methodology, and the concepts that are part of this vocabulary. I'm almost done, so I'll do it as quickly as possible. Let me share the screen here. I don't know why. I don't know. It's not accepting the sharing of my screen, I think. So I'll just paste the link in the chat here. And you know, I know where it is. It's just that it's not it's a web page, and it's not appearing on the list of shareable thumbnails when I select the tool. Oh, but the link is in the chat, and then I'll quickly explain. My idea is to choose some words. Some are already existent, some are specific to this research, and I consider them a usable concept whenever you have an example of that in analog film, in electronic format, and in digital. So example number one, spatial montage or ambience. And it's already an established concept. Lev Manovich discussed it. Gumbrich uses that a lot. And this is something that can be, and I narrowed it down to two examples here. Just for the sake of organizing time, but for example here it can be applied to a piece such as Scriabin's Prometheus Poem of Fire, which is a concert with audiovisual elements that is done in 1911. So related to the cycle of analog cinema and analog languages, and actually this is more connected to the musical tradition and to the insertion of chromatic elements in concert rooms. But it's a piece that explored this idea of spatial montage because it bathes the concert room in colorful lights. And then the same kind of strategies happens in Robert Henke's Lumiere, which is a very recent performance. I don't remember the year. I think it's from 2012 or something like that. And it's also the same strategy. So it's a concert room, and there are laser projections that they do not keep restricted to the screen, but somehow project onto the environment of where the project is being presented. So second concept is loop or microcuts. And the examples that I bring to the table are the cut-ups by William Burroughs, also from the analog film cycle, where you have very short editings and that somehow anticipates the strategies of looping images that you will have in VJ languages, for example, in a project by Addictive TV called Being the Best, which would be example number 2. And then the same goes for masks. For example, you have in video art transitions from Peter Campos that rely heavily on masks, and from brown to green by Sean Hopfield that does the same. And then for pose effects that are used in Peter Kubelka's Arnold Heiner from 1960s, and Grotesco Sublime Mix by Luis Duva, which is a more recent installation in Brazil, and so on and so forth. And then it goes with generative resources, remixing, and the use of organic materials. So that's the methodology that I'm using, always trying to compare 3. I narrowed it down for 2 words here, but I always have 3 examples, and then when that happens, I consider the 3 examples part of this important repertoire of experimental audiovisual languages, and also the concept is a usable concept to be well, people can rely on to develop a critical analysis of those pieces. That's, well, I stop here. Gabriel, thanks. I think I extrapolated a little bit of the time. I'm sorry for that.